Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole crew styling when we step out of the car. Bouncers lift the rope and the crowd goes off. 20 shots to the table, we don't even hit the bar.
So welcome back to our audience here to the Florida International University Ratcliffe Art and Design Incubator and this session with Inspicio Arts. I want to welcome back on this fall day, Ray Ellman. Hi, Ray.
Hi, Maggie. It's always such a pleasure to talk with you. And I always learn something when we're having a conversation.
Oh, me too. I really enjoy your all of these interviews. They're quite interesting, and I think we can all learn a little bit about, all of these guests. So thank you for that window to this great information, Ray. So our guest here is Charles Blow. He's, I guess, most known for his New York Times opinion column that he's had since 2008, and it comes out every Monday and Thursday. He's also an author of a few books, and he's also a broadcast news anchor on BNC, better known as the Black News Channel in Prime with Charles Blow. So let's talk a little bit about his beginnings, his theory on reverse migration, which is very, very interesting. And then let's talk a little bit about the Metropolitan Opera that's kind of inspired upon one of his memoirs.
So Charles Blow is such a multifaceted person, and he grew up in, as he describes it in Fire Shut Up in My Bones, his memoir. He grew up in poor circumstances in Louisiana, and was able for his brilliance to shine through and progress into a variety of professions. And one of the things that's, he graduated magna cum laude from college, but what really surprised me, because I've always known him as a columnist for the New York Times, is that he started there as a graphic designer. And he came in at an entry position and eventually became head of graphic design for the New York Times. And when he left the Times before he had his column to be the art director for National Geographic. So those are two huge positions. And it's amazing that he has that visual skill. But he's also obviously a insightful thinker, and hence his column. The book that I interviewed him primarily about, because he's presenting at the Miami Book Fair which starts next week in November 2021. The book is called The Devil You Know. And he told me the impetus for this book was that, or this concept, was that somebody had sent him a book about the phenomena of hippies, I guess back in the 70s, maybe 60s, migrating in large enough numbers to the state of Vermont that they were able to change the political balance and elect liberals like Bernie Sanders. Maybe also create some ice cream along the way, like Ben and Jerry's. I'm not sure. But matter of fact, Ben and Jerry could have been part of the hippie group that came there. But anyway, that inspired him when he thought about that, and he thought about the ramifications of it. He started thinking about the massive 6 million person African-American migration at the beginning of the 20th century from roughly, actually, it really ranges from 1910 to 1970. They still include 1970 in that, of African Americans who were oppressed in the South and moved north looking for more freedom and looking for better jobs. When they did that, at the time they did that, African Americans were very close to being the majority demographic of the South. Of course, they couldn't vote, but had they been able to vote, they could have had a big impact on everything from the Supreme Court to the presidents of the United States. And as I think he put it, it would have been only liberal presidents would have been elected, and the Supreme Court would have been very liberal. When African Americans moved north, the density of population wasn't sufficient to change the balance of places they moved to as much. What he realized, and one of the things he describes, is he had a friend who grew up in similar circumstances who became president of a bank eventually, a woman. And she eventually moved to a very successful middle-class Black community around the Atlanta area. And what Charles Blow became aware of was her life was more comfortable in the sense of she wasn't afraid. She didn't have to as much tell her young boys that, the conversation that, you could be careful what you say because you could be murdered at any point by perhaps a police officer. They didn't have to, there was a much more comfortable community there. And he began to think about the idea of Blacks moving back to the South. And when he did his research, he saw that if African Americans did a reverse migration, they could become the dominant political force in 9 southern states. So that's his thesis.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that because, we mentioned that it's based upon the hippies going to Vermont and kind of changing the state, but they made such a change, and this was a couple of decades ago, that it's kind of remained a sort of liberal state because, Bernie Sanders has been reelected quite a few times, and people down here, for example, we are in Florida. I grew up in Miami. I always hear people telling me that Vermont is a socialist state because of Bernie Sanders and that label around it. So it's just interesting how a group of people can move from one geography to another and be able to change the political scene and the political destiny of that state, correct?
Well, but an observation here, I lived a good chunk of my life in what people euphemistically call the People's Republic of Cambridge, which is the community in Boston, as well as on the tip of Cape Cod in Provincetown, which is also super liberal. So we never thought of Vermont as being a liberal state, but because it's much more rural than Massachusetts is. But you're right. Obviously, Bernie Sanders has been reelected many times, and the state, I'm sure, went for Joe Biden. So you're right about that.
Yeah. I just feel like his theory is interesting and something that I think in this moment and this movement in time is good for a conversation.
Something I want to throw in here, and this shows you if you don't do enough research when you're interviewing somebody, you can leave something out that's fascinating. And I was watching CBS Sunday Morning yesterday, and they did a whole segment on the first opera composed by a Black person that was ever performed at Lincoln Center this year. So it took all this time, even though Black composers had been submitting works, they'd been rejected forever. And that work was based on Charles Blow's memoir, Fire Shut Up in My Bones. And when I heard them say that on television, I thought, oh my God, how did I miss that? That would have been a great thing to do.
Why didn't he bring it up in the interview?
Because he was focused. First of all, it was hard to get an interview with him. He was doing back-to-back interviews, and he was focused on his new book. And that's what he really wanted to talk about. And if I'd done my research, I would have slipped it in there. But
it says on if the audience visits the website at the Metropolitan Opera, it says it began on October 23rd. Is that correct?
I'm not sure of the exact date.
Yeah, and
But I
you
would
know,
love to see it. I saw snippets of a performance on CBS Sunday Morning. I would start off to our audience, I would start off by Googling CBS Sunday Morning and Fire Shut Up in My Bones. And also, by the way, Charles Blow is a contributor to CBS Sunday Morning. So, you know, it's interesting that it all came together.
So I always ask, you know, when we're, you know, in the interview, you know, what takeaway do we take from this conversation with our guest, you know, Charles Blow? What do you think he's going to be remembered as? A New York Times columnist, a broadcast news anchor, a contributor? What takeaway do we have from him?
Well, if he achieves this reverse migration, by the way, I asked him, was he trying to form a coalition of people to try and make this reverse migration come about? And what he said was, I interviewed a lot of people to get their reaction. Bill Clinton, Henry Louis Gates Jr., you know, people of that level of both accomplishment and thinking. And he said he could interview them for the purpose of his book, but he couldn't be an activist that actually tried to make this come about, because then he couldn't be a journalist. He couldn't cover Bill Clinton as a journalist if he was trying to get him to be part of a coalition to make a political event happen. So I totally understand that. I think one other interesting thing I want to toss in here is that whenever I have the opportunity to interview somebody, an African-American like Charles Blow, I asked them if they ever heard of the Hampton House. And as you know, and as I've said before, I'm deeply involved in the Hampton House. In fact, for Black History Month, February 2022, I'm having an exhibition of very large-scale portraits I made of people who were either patrons or performers at the Hampton House. The opening is going to be on February 26th, but they're going to be up all month, starting February 1st. And so I asked Charles Blow if he'd ever heard of the Hampton House. He never heard of it. And I was trying to explain to him it could be the most important crossroads in African-American history, and tell him why. So one of the things I said to him is, when he's here for the book fair, if he has time, I'm going to take him over to the Hampton House and introduce him to it. Because having somebody of his
His stature,
big spotlight on him, having him be aware of the Hampton House and maybe write a column about it could be huge.
Totally, I agree. I mean, hopefully when he's down at the book fair, he can go over and take a look and kind of give it some traction.
And so the one other thing I want to add to what I was just describing, the Hampton House, and the reason my reception for my artwork is at the end of the month, is they're having something they're calling the Greatest Weekend, which is celebrating Cassius Clay's victory over Sonny Liston to gain the World Heavyweight Championship, the anniversary of that victory. So it's happening the whole weekend, the 25th, 26th, 27th, and there's going to be all kinds of historical figures there and entertainment figures there, and it's going to be quite an event.
Okay, thank you, Ray. It's always a pleasure to connect with you every week and talk about these fascinating guests and topics.
Great to see you again, Maggie, and I can't wait till the next time.
Thank you, Ray. Have a fabulous week.
You too. Bye-bye.